While I've been trying to spice up my boring life for the new year, Daryl Morey spiced up the Houston Rockets starting in 2017 by reinventing the Rockets offense. This worked as the Houston Rockets had the most historic offense up to date, led by James Harden and Chris Paul. With this dynamic duo, they were able to win 118 total regular season games in the West and win each playoff series in 5 games until they saw the Warriors. For a team that was subject to highlight clips like this,
to work. I thought it was going to be.
Oh man, Harden. Oh, he stared at Wesley Johnson and then he hit the three.
both seasons ended more like this.
Curry surrounded, finds Draymond Green. Green to the basket, kicks it out of Iguodala. Thompson for 3. Bang! Klay Thompson from downtown. It's a 6-point lead.
So for a team that had the best offense in NBA history, what exactly went wrong? Was it because strip clubs in Houston were S tier? Was it because CP3 repeatedly made fun of James Harden for having man boobs? To answer this groundbreaking question, I'm going to break it down into 4 parts. What were the Rockets running offensively? Why did they decide to do this? Why did it work so well? And why did it eventually fail against the Warriors? To answer the first question, the Rockets ran something dubbed as Morey Ball. This was a system that basically eliminated the mid-range shot from the offense. The philosophy behind this offense was that there are many ways to score 2 points: a layup, jump shot, or a post-up, just to name a few. While there are many ways to score 2 points, not every shot is as efficient as the next, specifically the mid-range shot compared to a layup. For instance, the best mid-range shooters hovered around 50%, which meant at best you were scoring 1 point per possession. If you average that out for an entire game, you would only be scoring 100 points per game. Now, when players are less than 5 feet around the basket, those averages shoot up to 60 and even 70% if you're Giannis or LeBron. In that case, you would be scoring 1.2 to 1.4 points per possession, good enough for 120 to 140 points per game. As you can see, Morey wanted the Rockets to be as hyper-efficient as possible, so he wanted his team to focus on getting more high percentage shots such as threes, layups, and free throws. So how is he going to accomplish this? Well, in a copycat league that was being highlighted by ball movement, pace, and Steph Curry being everyone's daddy, Morey decided to try something unique. He wanted his main ball handlers, in this case James Harden and Chris Paul, to isolate one-on-one. To maximize the amount of floor space for them to operate, he wanted the rest of his lineups to either be shooters or a big around the rim to catch lobs and get offensive rebounds, which leads to the second question. Why did the Rockets believe running a heavy isolation system was the most efficient offense? Let's first start with the Warriors. The Warriors were the team that everyone was targeting, and one of their main defensive principles was switching. Since they had great defenders in Klay, Draymond, Durant, and Iguodala, they were content with switching screens and forcing teams to play in isolation. This would essentially eliminate what other opposing teams were running. Many teams also didn't have the spacing or the ball handlers that could continuously create their own shot. The only team that fit that framework at the time was the Cleveland Cavaliers, but they couldn't guard a traffic cone, so they didn't pose a serious threat. Because the Rockets knew the Warriors were switching, they knew that they would need to master iso ball in order to beat them, and so they spent both seasons running an offense that no fan wanted to watch. Harden handling his ball 50 times before putting up a shot. For Harden, his signature step-back shot wasn't something that he had mastered when he first came to Houston. Through the course of 4 seasons, he averaged less than 1 step-back 3 a game, but he was pretty efficient in this category. He shot 55% on step-back 3s in 2015 and 40% in 2016 and 2017, so there were signs that he could scale this up, especially when you have good spacing and a matchup that you can exploit. He already had a great dribble package coming out of college and triple threat moves that helped him get to the basket or create a shot. Knowing that he was going to have a massive responsibility isolating a lot during games, Harden slimmed down by losing 11 pounds in the 2017 offseason. Even though Harden was the bona fide number 1 option, he needed a running mate to preserve his legs and energy as much as possible. In the 2017 offseason, the Rockets added Chris Paul, which led to a lot of offseason questions, but the biggest one for the Houston was if CP3 could adjust to this isolation-heavy system. Fans are mostly familiar with Chris Paul's play in the pick and roll, especially as the passer, which seems contradictory to this isolation-heavy style. But Paul was a really strong isolation player in 2016, scoring at 1.09 points per possession, which was much better than Harden's 0.97 points per possession. His ability to isolate so well stems from what the Rockets were looking for him to do in Houston, manipulating the defense to find mismatches and take advantage of them. Once he found those mismatches, he would either elevate over the defender or use his pull-up jumper, which he was great at over the past few seasons before coming to Houston. With the IQ and repertoire that Paul has, the Rockets believed that he was the right fit for Houston, and they were right for a while, but more on that later. During the 2017 season, the Rockets' plan for their offense worked better than they could have imagined. Harden and Paul were averaging insane numbers when they went to isolation. Harden averaged 10 ISOs a game and scored 1.22 points per possession, which was as good as someone taking a shot from less than 5 feet around the rim. And for Paul, he was scoring 1.1 points per possession, which was better than KD, LeBron, and Damian Lillard. Both stars were successful for different reasons. As stated earlier, Harden's step-back jumper was his main skill in his arsenal. The reason it was so successful was because teams early on were not used to guarding Harden so far out on the perimeter. As Mike Malone put it, if you find yourself guarding James Harden and your 2 feet are inside the 3-point line, you're dead. Typically, a contested step-back shot is a win for a defense, but not with Harden. Many teams that were content with switching made sure that Harden couldn't beat them using dribble penetration. They knew that Harden loved driving left, so they would shade him right and force him to beat them with his offhand. However, Harden loved stepping back to his right, and many teams were playing right into his strengths. And so with the amount of space that they were giving him, along with basically inviting him to shoot, he was able to find a lot of success with this step back. To Harden's credit, he is also one of the best at manipulating defenders' movements by watching the defender's feet to get the shot he wants. Similar to how Paul and LeBron move defenses to make a specific pass, Harden will do the same with his matchup. When Harden looks at the defender's feet, he's reading their movements. If both of their feet are inside the 3-point line, he is more likely to pull a 3 than I'll pull a girl. When the defender's feet are shaky or just continuously having happy feet, he knows that his defender is waiting for him to drive and he will break them down. He likes using the jab to see how your defender is moving. If the defender is already backing up, he knows that the step back 3 is an available option. It's also a great way to get people that are longer than him to move just a bit to get a bit more of an open look. Once he adds a crossover to his series of moves, it's almost impossible to stop. He will use the crossover to lure the defender to sleep and then step back immediately to create the space that he needs to score. The pacing of his crossovers keeps the defender guessing to see if he's driving or shooting, and with a lot of space to work with, many teams were basically putting out their weaker defenders on an island against one of the best scorers in the NBA. For Harden, his goal was to get his defender off balance, specifically to get their momentum leaning back so that he can create enough space for a step back 3. The other tricky part is how you have to guard Harden. While coaches implore defenders to show their hands on defense, you really have to do this with Harden because of his tendency to draw fouls. On 3-point shots, he will feel the defender's arm and begin his shooting motion under it so that he can draw a foul. If your arm is out there, he will feel the contact and hook your arm before going up. On contested shots, you have to make sure you don't get into his landing space or else he will exaggerate the contact. In isolation, he's drawing fouls 20% of the time, which is by far the most frequent besides Damian Lillard. Because of this, most teams have started contesting Harden on the side to avoid fouling on 3-point shots and avoid using their hands to guard him. Here, Looney puts his hands close to his body so that Harden can't draw any cheap fouls. For Chris Paul, he loves using the pick and roll to string big men to the quarter and use the step out for the 3. He shot 49% on corner 3s, with a lot of these shots coming from isolations with big men. Because of his dribble package and the available space on the perimeter, big men are often hesitant to press up, and if they do, this is what it could result in.
Good a man as you could ever come across. How do you normally say salt of the earth? Well, he's more than that. Oh, no, he did. What a play, no, he did.
Unlike the rest of the team, Paul was the one guy that was encouraged to take mid-range jump shots because of how efficient he was at them. He shot 54% on mid-range jump shots in 2017, and a lot of those shots were taken through isolations on mismatches. Just like Harden, His goal was to break down the defender's feet and find open space. Paul lived in the middle of the floor from elbow to elbow. Defenders often wanted to push him left, which is fine because he'll often use the crossover to open up the defender and then snap the ball into his shooting pocket before elevating for his patented 15-foot jumper. Here, Bielitsa is shading him left, and he uses the crossover to open him up. He then uses a quick burst of speed to get by him and steps back for his elbow jumper. His quick burst of speed has typically been used to set up the defender. Once he realizes they're trailing him, he stops on a dime, waits for them to pass, and then shoots a shot. If the defender is close to him, he typically relies on his fadeaway mid-range to create enough room to score. A simple two-step with his left foot in front gets him balanced enough to square up for these shots. Because of Paul and Harden's ability to create so much separation, the Rockets system was built to make role players' lives much easier. Each role player had 3 primary skills they needed to master: shooting the 3, taking the defender off the dribble to the basket, and defending. A lot of the time was spent on the perimeter waiting for a pass or screen to get Harden or Paul a matchup they like. From there, they had to react to the defense. If they double, you might find Tucker or Ariza in the middle, looking either for the floater or making the open pass. If the defense wanted to push Harden into the paint, he would kick it out to an open teammate in which they had to make a decision: pull the 3 or attack the defense. And the success from this offense in the regular season carried over to the postseason. The Rockets handled the Timberwolves and Jazz in 5 games due to their ability to attack multiple weaker defenders on both teams, which leads to the Golden State Warriors. How did the Rockets find so much success against them, and what went wrong in the end? As most of you know, the Rockets were able to take a 3-2 series lead on the Warriors in the 2017 series. In Game 3, Andre Iguodala got hurt, which opened up more opportunities for the Rockets to take advantage of mismatches. With Iguodala on the floor, the Rockets primarily win at Curry because he was the weakest out of the Hamptons 5. Hiding one player on the floor isn't too hard, as there's ways to milk the shot clock and force Harden or Paul into a rush shot. For example, the Warriors started using pre-switching occasionally to prevent any mismatches. Here, Chris Paul wants David West on him. Tucker first tells Capella to be a decoy on the other side so Green is out of the play, but Draymond's not even looking at Capella. Gordon initially tries to set the screen, but Thompson takes Gordon, so Tucker tries taking David West with him, but Green takes Tucker, so the play is blown up. The Rockets wasted about 8 seconds trying to get a switch and eventually fail. But once there's 2 players on the floor that you can attack, hiding both becomes more difficult. In particular, the Rockets picked on Kevon Looney a lot in games 4 and 5 because of the speed advantage from Harden and Paul. Now, when you look at these clips, your first instinct may be to think that Looney wasn't that great of an on-ball defender at that time. And while that is true to an extent, I thought the Warriors' game plan in 2018 was to let Harden and Paul attack the hoop and have the help defender, in this case Draymond, come help at the right time so that they could challenge Harden and Paul at the rim. The Warriors have consistently defended other heliocentric offenses this way, where they had accepted the switch and waited to challenge the main ball handler at the rim with multiple defenders. They wanted to defend this way because they didn't want other shooters to get in a consistent rhythm, which would open up the entire offense. And the Warriors had tried something similar at that time due to the 3-point shooters around them, but it didn't work out that way against Houston. Here, Looney is pressed up on Harden because he doesn't want Harden to step back and is inviting the drive. Green is late, and Harden gets right to the basket. Same thing here. Paul has Curry on the right side of the court, and Green is waiting for the drive, but is again late, and Paul is able to get an easy floater at the rim. And so the reason this defense wasn't working is because Harden and Chris Paul, for the most part, had space to dribble and create the shots that they wanted. This means that the matchup they wanted, Curry or Looney, primarily were on an island, having to guard against a potential jumper and the drive. The Warriors were also playing a lot of their bench players like Jordan Bell, David West, and Quinn Cook. There was always someone the Rockets could exploit on offense. The Warriors had put in some different coverages to try and slow this down, but there was a lot of miscommunication on some of these coverages. For example, on the pick and roll, Curry is looking for Jordan Bell to pick up Harden as he races to cover Paul, but Bell doesn't get the memo and leads to a wide open 3. Here, the Warriors are figuring out who should match up with who to make sure that Harden wasn't looking for Curry in the pick and roll. Curry and Green are slow to react, and Gordon gets a wide open 3, but he misses. Part of the reason here could be that the Warriors need more time to prepare for these types of complex coverages and to better communicate this down the stretch. But despite all of the defensive miscues, they were still able to defend the Rockets well in clutch time. In the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, the Rockets averaged an offensive rating of 88.9. And this is when the Warriors played their best defensive lineup by putting in the Big Four along with Sean Livingston. The Rockets spent a lot of time trying to get a switch on Curry, and with more defensive support by shading, Paul and Harden struggled to score. But because of the timely threes that Eric Gordon had made, along with some fantastic defense, a 3-2 series lead, and a Chris Paul hamstring injury, the Rockets' struggling offense in crunch time was overshadowed, which leads to the two main concerns of playing this style: injuries and predictability. Chris Paul's hamstring injury shouldn't have been a complete surprise if you were following the Rockets that season. In March, Paul had missed 3 games due to a hamstring injury, and in Game 3 of the Western Conference Finals, there were questions about how well Paul was moving, specifically on defense against Curry. The Rockets had said that if Paul had to limp to the finish line, he was still going to play. And with the burden of having to create offense on a lot of plays, there was always a chance that he could get seriously hurt. While I'm not a doctor, I know that Paul has played the least amount of games in his career when he was in Houston. Without Paul, Harden was left with the responsibility to carry the Rockets to the finals. In Game 7 against the Warriors, the Rockets started out strong, similar to Games 4 and 5, by attacking the Warriors' weaker defenders and getting a lot of offensive rebounds. But by the second half, it started becoming apparent that Harden was wearing down. And while Harden has much more stamina than me when I do certain physical activities, he needed someone that could consistently create some offense. Eric Gordon did his best to keep the Rockets in the game with 4 to 5 strong drives in the second half. While the narrative for this game is highlighted by those 27 missed threes, I disagree with the notion that the Rockets try to shoot themselves back in the game. The Rockets did take some bad threes, but Harden and other role players realized early in the third quarter that they needed to attack the basket more and started to do so relentlessly. Here's the reality though. When you are playing isolation basketball, the offense is naturally predictable, but the power of the system comes from the skill involved to create open shots. When half of those skills, in this case 3-point shooting, is not working the way it usually does, there's only so much you can do, especially when a decent amount of shots were wide open, and a lot of them were missed badly. I do believe Paul with his mid-range jumper could have definitely helped this struggling offense to give Harden a breather, but I'm not sure if he could have improved their 3-point percentage as much. And so if there are two things that could have signaled the start of a decline, it was sustainability and the predictability of the offense, which carried over into the 2018 season. In 2018, Chris Paul's health prevented him from being the player that he was in 2017. He averaged 0.92 points per possession on isolation, in part because he had a harder time generating space and beating defenders at will. In 2017, Paul wanted to play the shooting guard role with Harden, saying that he was looking forward to playing off ball and taking more catch and shoot threes. But in 2018, he wanted to run more set plays instead of isolating all the time, even though Harden was generating 1.1 points per possession. While his health may have played a factor into doing this, as one of the smartest players in the league, he also likely recognized that the Rockets needed more set plays to get the Warriors defense moving, especially in the playoffs. But because Paul was out for a third of the year, Harden had to carry the Rockets using isolation basketball, and it became known that Harden would need to take more responsibility into the playoffs, because Paul wasn't fully healthy. And to Harden's credit, if he was the best player on the team and Chris Paul was struggling to find his own shot, I can understand why he believed that isolation basketball was going to work, but Paul was eventually right in the playoffs. In the 2019 playoffs, the Warriors made 2 important adjustments that made isolation basketball more difficult. They first wanted to clog up more space so that Harden couldn't get to the rim. This meant they were more aggressive by leaving the corner open to make sure Harden couldn't get easy layups, especially without Kevin Durant. Here, Harden drives and Green comes from the strong side corner to make sure Harden couldn't get to the basket. Even though Tucker makes his 3, the Warriors tested the Rockets' role players to see if they could continue making these shots. In the third, Paul has Looney and Curry stands at the free throw line to discourage any drive to the basket. Once Green blows by Curry, Jerebko comes very early from the corner to contest Green's drive to the basket. You didn't see this as much in the 2018 playoffs because they were concerned about other shooters getting hot, but that wasn't the case in 2019. Secondly, they knew that a lot of Rockets' possessions in the 2018 playoffs ended with the shot clock running down and didn't want Harden isolating one-on-one. When there were 5 seconds left on the shot clock, the Warriors would double Harden and rotate to the open man, knowing that there wasn't going to be enough time to make a play. This led to a lot of shot clock violations and gave the Warriors the edge they needed to win, despite not having Kevin Durant for the last game and a half. So if you made it this far into the video, here's what you need to know. The Rockets believe that they had 2 of the most creative ball handlers that could naturally get defenders off balance time and time again, which was true for the most part. Because they could break down a defense individually, it wouldn't matter what defense anyone could run. With the space and a deep repertoire that both Harden and Paul had, they could beat their defender in a variety of ways, collapse a defense, and have the role players figure out what to do from there. However, there were 2 caveats to this philosophy. First, when one of those 2 ball handlers can't handle the burden of creating offense every play, this could create problems when the main ball handler gets tired from pounding the ball a million times. 2, this offense is naturally predictable. When teams have more time to prepare, they can find more creative ways to throw off bits and pieces of this offense. That's exactly what happened in 2019. The Warriors were more prepared to shrink the floor, get the ball out of Harden's hands, and force role players to continuously make plays. With Chris Paul's health concerns, they took their chances on doubling Harden more often, knowing that he was the guy for the whole game and not just the first half. In theory, this offense can work if you have at least 2 of the best offensive creators that were in amazing shape, along with great shooters and a big man to cover the paint. The most historic offense today is the 2021 Brooklyn Nets, who played a similar style to the Rockets, except they had 3 of the best isolation players in NBA history. While this offensive style hasn't resulted in a championship, there have been many teams who have adopted this style of play because it is easier to implement and naturally very effective if you have the right players around them. It's much harder to adopt a style like the Warriors, where you have to learn how to screen, cut, and move at full speed and shoot it with a hand in your face. And so a lot of teams have resorted to an offense where you can truly play off your instincts, which has worked very well. So if you wasted 20 minutes of your life watching this video, you might as well hit the like and subscribe button. If you want to waste more time watching videos like this, please let me know. Besides